Can everybody hear me? Alrighty, I'm going to stand beside the podium because sometimes if I'm behind it, people cannot see me. So we'll go ahead and start with the presentation. I've got 15 minutes to share a lot of information with you, but Renee actually presented one of my slides, so that's really good. So uh, I want to go ahead and start by just saying as a disclaimer that this presentation is considered technical assistance and advice and not any type of legal information. But if you do have questions in the future about the information that I'm going to discuss today, please feel free to call our office and we'll be happy to set up an appointment with you to maybe go over how to create digital content and also to help review your content. The phone number will be at the end of the slide. Next slide. So as our office was established in 1978, which was in advance of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which came about in 1990. So San Antonio was ahead of the curve with regard to having a disability access office. Our office manager serves as a citywide ADA 504 and 508 coordinator, and we are part of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Department. What we focus mostly on is capacity building and assisting city departments with their, whether it's physical barriers or also digital barriers, technical advice and assistance and guidance. Next slide. So as Renee said, you know what our mission is. We want to make sure that all city program services and activities are accessible to people with disabilities so that they can fully enjoy the San Antonio lifestyle. Next slide. So this is really going to start the presentation now, and this is really, really important to me, and I'm sure to many of you. So why is digital accessibility important? And we heard earlier today about the statistical numbers of individuals with disabilities, maybe 15 to 25%. But it's more important than that. It's not about numbers. It's really about ensuring that people with disabilities have access to the same content the rest of us have access to in the way that they can access it independently and freely. So when we create accessibility, whether it be documents that are uploaded to our website and other types of accessible items, we are opening that avenue, if you will, to include more individuals, right? To be able to get that information, to be able to complete documents, to be able to participate in surveys. They're now able to participate in city life in the way that we would hope most citizens would. And the other thing, and we can stay on this slide, but I want to say, when we design for disabilities, we design for all of us, right? So a couple of examples come to mind. We all are familiar with curb cuts. When we cross the street and we go up that little ramp up to the sidewalk that was really designed and developed for people with mobility issues or maybe who use wheelchairs. A lot of moms that are pushing their babies in strollers or people making deliveries are able to use that as a way to conveniently access the sidewalk. We're also familiar with closed captionings on videos, TV shows. That also is great for many of us who might be in a very loud area. I mean, if you grew up in a family like mine, there was never a quiet moment. And so that would have been a great tool for me to use to be able to just read something quietly, right, and get the information. So what is digital accessibility? So for the purposes of this presentation, it's been defined as, or I'm defining it as, content that can be accessed by persons with disabilities without any assistance from anybody else. And that means that they're going to use their own assistive technology devices or adaptive technology. That might be a screen reader. That might be a text to braille device. It could be other devices, but they're able to get to that content independently without asking someone else for help. It also means that the information can be perceived, that content can be perceived. So if someone's using a screen reader, this is a device that reads text out loud. They would be able to hear the information and to understand that information. Also, then understanding the information really lends itself more to how we write that information. Are we writing at about a 6th to 8th grade level that most of us will understand, unless it's a technical piece? So we want to make sure that we're focusing also on the communication style that we're using. Is a language something that everybody can understand? And then lastly, are we navigating through the content? Are they able to navigate through the content? And that would be using screen reader device, maybe using a text to braille device or other device that enables them to independently access the information. Next slide. So we have some legal criteria that we are subject to. I'm going to go through these very, very quickly. I'm not even going to talk about Section 508. It's a federal law, one of the first laws that protected federal employees and also people who visited federal websites and buildings that they were guaranteed access. Americans with Disabilities Act, we all know, in 1990 this came about. This was a law essentially that protected individuals with disabilities and ensure that they would have equal access to the same thing everybody else has access to. That could be buildings, it could be public right-of-ways, it could be digital content. So it's all of these areas to ensure that they have access as well. Section 508 deals more with information and communication technology. It's one of the ones that governs a lot of the things that we do, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Web content accessibility guidelines are not laws, but guidelines. These are international guidelines that nearly every country uses to ensure that websites are developed and have accessibility features for any person who needs access to that content. And then the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act is what governs video content, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so we're going to get started. I'm going to try to stick within my 15 minutes. So how do we create accessible content, right? Digital accessibility. And these are the topics that are really, really important for you to include when you're developing digital content. And we're going to start first with the use of headings. I do want to point out that many of these topics I'm going to discuss are included in Microsoft products in their ribbon. And I'm going to talk about that as I go further into the presentation. But if you start with that original document, which is a source document, it could be Microsoft, it could be a PowerPoint presentation, Excel spreadsheet. They all have that ribbon at the top that has built-in accessibility features. And if you're not familiar with the ribbon, please get very familiar with it, because everything you create should have, if you can use one of the features, you should be using it to create that accessible content. Next slide. So a good place to start is with the Microsoft Accessibility Checker. This is again on the ribbon, it's under the Review tab. So actually when you start your presentations, you can use this to check it periodically to make sure that you are creating an accessible document. Next slide. And so what we're going to start with in that ribbon, Microsoft ribbon, is the headings styles. You can select the heading that is most appropriate for wherever you are in the content. And I cannot stress this enough. If you're using, when you create Word documents, if you're using caps or if you're using a larger font to indicate a heading, a screen reader, which is what a person will use who cannot see the screen, this individual may be blind or have low vision, is listening to this content, and they can actually skip from heading to heading if they want to go through that document quickly by jumping from heading to heading. But if we do not use the heading feature in this design, that is not something that the screen reader will successfully be able to do. So we want to make sure that we use the headings, that we have the one heading, heading 1, and then 2 for similar sub information, and then number 3, right? Heading 3 for subsequent headings. Next slide. Same with links. Screen readers, and I know I'm going to focus a lot on screen readers, but this is because most people who are blind, who have low vision abilities, are going to use a device like JAWS that is going to read the information aloud. When we have descriptive links in the body of our work, if we just leave the URL as it is, drop it in, the screen reader will read that address, which doesn't make a lot of sense. If I asked you to read it to me out loud, it wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? But if we put a description to that link, so if we change that link from that URL line to a descriptive link that tells us, if we're reading it, and also somebody using a screen reader, where you're going, this is much more helpful. This is a much better way to navigate through that page. The other thing is screen readers are able to list links only, so that a person using a screen reader, if they want to look at the list of links in that particular document, can go through those links and say, oh, I want to look at this information instead of wasting my time with the rest of this. We have an advantage if we read that page, because we can do the same thing, right? If we see something, we think, I don't really care about that. Let me go to the next section. Well, this using headers and links with description enables a person using a screen reader to do just that. Next slide. So alt text, alternate text, is what we use to describe an image that you've dropped into, whether it's a Word document, it could be a PowerPoint presentation, an Excel spreadsheet, or anything really. If the image adds important content to what you're talking about, you definitely want to put the alt text in there describing what that image is. And you don't have to put a lot of words in there, but you really want to convey what the message is that that image is wanting to convey, right? If it's not important, if it doesn't add any value to the narrative, then you can mark it as decorative. And there's a feature there that lets you mark it so the screen reader will go right past it, right? So some of the items that we definitely want to use alt text with would be images, smart art, shapes, charts, and objects, because all of those are images, and a screen reader will come to it, and when it gets to an image, the word it will read out, and it sounds just like this. Forgive me. Blank. It says blank, just like that. Imagine, so this helps somebody though, right? If they don't need to know this, but if they do need to know it and it says blank, they're missing out on relevant information. So it's really important. If it's something that adds to the narrative, make sure you use information about it that conveys that. Next slide. Another very helpful tool that is in the Microsoft Ribbon are the lists and bullets feature, right? So if you have content or you have information that you want to have a hierarchy to based on the importance of the information you're wanting to convey, you're going to want to use a numbering system. If you just add numbers, put 1 and tab over 2, that is not going to work well with a screen reader. That person is not going to have an experience that we would have looking at that information. So it's really important if you've got information that you feel has got to be in a certain order based on the most important to the least, you want to use a numbering system. If you have information that's equally important, there's not one part that may be more important than the other, you can use bullets or one of the features that comes with the bullet features. Now, tables are another item that really presents some obstacles and barriers for people with disabilities. If we don't create tables in the right fashion, the information is not accessible. So again, I would like for you to use, if you're using a Word document or any of the Word features, PowerPoint or document, please use the table on the ribbon. You can drop the table. So if you click on the table feature, you can put the number of tables, the number of columns. Once you've done that, you want to make sure and keep it as a simple table. And the top illustrates what a simple table is. We've got the headings above, that's the header line, and then beneath it, we have the information that we're wanting to report on. Too medium for girls, too large. The bottom illustrates a more complex table, which sometimes screen readers cannot read. So if we drop a table within a table, if we have multiple headers above each other, the screen reader isn't sure where it's supposed to go, so it may not read the information in order. So we ask that you use simple tables when you're conveying information. And the other thing is, if you've got a table that doesn't have, if you've got a box that doesn't have information, it may be the leftmost box and you're thinking, I don't have anything in there, don't leave it blank. Please either, if you don't put content in it that matches with what you're wanting to report on, then put left blank. So you want to write those words because the screen reader will then read that and the person that knows I'm not missing any information, it's just going to go on to the next box, the next square. Next slide. Color charts and tables is also very important because as we're looking at this, we can pretty much gather the information that we need based on this slide, right? We can see the colors that, I know it's kind of small, forgive me for that, but it's showing us the colors and which has more to it, like the blue, the red, or so forth. Screen readers cannot read out colors in a chart. They cannot read out percentages. So what is the best approach if you're going to use a pie chart is to build a table beside it that conveys that information because the screen reader will go straight to that table. Now, I'm going to let you know this particular that's dropped in there, that's an image. So I would have to, if I left that as is, I would have to write all text on that to describe the table, which is what I would do, right? Because it's the table reflects the chart. So I would describe the table and I would mention there's a pie chart there, but that the table provides the information. Next slide. Color contrast. Now, most of us visually can look at a slide and see that there's poor color contrast, right? So we can tell that it's going to be, this particular slide here shows us that the bottom slides are there's barely any contrast with them. So what we want to do is make sure when we have we have text with a background, that the colors are so distinct from one another that they're easily seen. So someone who's colorblind or maybe has low color vision would be able, or low vision, to discern what that information is. Next slide. There's ways to check your information when you're using color. We happen to use WebAIM Color Contrast Checker, which you can Google to find, but there's other free contrast checkers out there that will do the job for you. They're very simple to use. And according to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is those international guidelines, they recommend a 4.5:1 ratio at the bottom. That's the floor for having contrast that would be suitable for even people who may be colorblind or have low vision. Next slide. Plain language is very important also. We want to make sure that when we're communicating with individuals, because we're not sure what the disabilities may be. There's multiple disabilities, mobility, there may be cognitive, intellectual. So what we want to do is make sure that the language we're using is not technical unless you're writing a technical piece. We want to make sure that it conveys the information in simple words, very direct words, and as few words as possible. Next slide. So once you've done all of this, you've used the ribbon for your Microsoft, whatever, if it's a document or a PowerPoint presentation, now you're going to have to check it because you probably weren't checking it like I suggested at the beginning as you're going through it, right? So you have finished, you have finished your assignment, and you're going to now check it with the checker. So next slide. So when you do the accessibility checker, remember, you're going to go to the ribbon where it says review. And if you could, please do this when you're, if you've got some of these already created documents or PowerPoint presentations, go to review, to the review tab, and then hit the check accessibility. And what's going to happen is if you have a document that does not have any accessibility issues, you're going to get this box right here. And it's going to tell you no accessibility issues, right? If you have accessibility issues, it's going to list those and what it suggests you do to correct those. And then once you've made your corrections, you'll come back and check it again to make sure it is accessible. Next slide. Most of us here in the city, when we've created Word documents, PowerPoints, once we save them and they don't have any accessibility issues, we're now going to save them as a PDF. That's a whole nother section that I cannot go over today. But PDFs, sometimes when you save them, just so you know this, you may have made a completely accessible document. When you save it as a PDF, sometimes it loses those accessibility features. So you're going to have to make sure that you understand the process then for correcting that again through the PDF process. Next slide. We also review for the city videos, and some of you may create videos. When you are creating videos, there's certain things it must have to make it accessible. It has to have captions, right? It also has to have audio descriptions, and that would be, let's say for instance, there's something going on in the back. Maybe there's a phone number and address, but the person narrating this didn't say anything about it. So we'd want to have that in the audio description. We want to have transcripts that will convey the information that's presented in the video. And lastly, if it is a video that is something that is going to provide a public service, whether it be an emergency, maybe we have inclement weather, bad weather coming. The city already uses a program called AHAS, which provides these alerts and uses individuals who provide sign language so that people who are in need of that information can have access to it right away. We would like for you to do ASL in your video if you can, but it may be cost prohibitive. So it's, as long as it's not something that would fall under that urgent or critical, that's not one of the things you must have. So I just want to say, I'm going to finish up by saying this. Accessibility is so important. You just saw my presentation, right? I'm going to tell you, and I wish I could show you this. There's accessibility issues in that presentation. So we don't know there's accessibility issues by looking at something. It's not like if we're out on the corner and we see one of those drop curves, right, a curb cut that maybe there's something blocking it or it's damaged. We can visually see that and know, oh, there's a problem here. We don't have that when we're looking at digital content. It's up to each of us to make sure when we create digital content, we're thinking of the end user. Does this person have a hearing disability? Maybe are they blind? Do they have a cognitive disability or intellectual disability? Do bright lights maybe bother them? So we don't want to have a lot of flashing things. We have to start putting ourselves in that person's place, and it's through empathy that we will create a product that is accessible to everybody. And I don't want you all to think it's an obligation. I want you to frame it as an opportunity to increase how we outreach to the citizens of San Antonio and visitors, to let them know we care about them and that the information we provide is accessible to each and every one of them. So that's my presentation. Any questions? Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. That's true. So yes, we have a process here at the City of San Antonio. So any digital content that will be uploaded to a city website, our office, once you've done your due diligence to make the document accessible, it then comes to our office, the Disability Access Office, where we do an accessibility review, and then we get back to the departments to report our findings and what our recommendations might be. So thank you for all of you for doing that. I know it's a big responsibility, but it's one that is very worthwhile for all of us. Any other questions or comments?